Hello, my name is Adam Shaw and welcome to Sustainable Tech, the Future Reimagined. Now this is a virtual event brought to you by the people from Circular Computing to explore, uncover and educate about the challenges of creating a more sustainable future in the world of technology. We're going to hear many different voices today, as well as the announcement of a genuine breakthrough in the IT sector. We'll hear from tech giants like Google and Ingram Micro, as well as those in government and the public sector. And that's going to include those from the Department for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or DEFRA for short, NHS, Shared Business Services. We're going to hear from Dr. Mike Short, the DIT's Chief Scientific Advisor and Cabinet Office Member and Member for Parliament, Penny Mordaunt. In addition, we'll hear from Balfour Beatty, who've installed thousands of pre-used computers, Soren Enholm, CEO of TCO Certified, the world's leading sustainability certification company, and Professor Mark Jolly of Cranfield University. Well, that's quite a list for you, and we've also got some reaction statements from some of the big industry tech players a little later on. Well, I'm joined now by Rod Neal, the founder of Circular Computing, Scott McMeekin, the CEO, and Steve Haskew, the head of sustainability. Scott, if I could start with you, let's begin with what I suppose is a simple question, at least. Who and what is Circular Computing?
Our mission is simple. We bring the world's best zero-compromise remanufactured laptops to business use.
Rod, you founded the company, 25 years ago. Why do you think now, right now, we're at such a pivotal moment for sort of sustainability issues in the tech industry?
I think that sustainability is becoming more important in all walks of life. And I think to take something and then 3 years later just lose the value in that product, that's just ridiculous. So I think what Circular Computing is bringing is a legitimized channel for a product that has been reused. And in doing that, we obviously capture the value for a lot longer period.
Steve, as head of sustainability at Circular Computing, why are we here? Why should we care?
If we look at the global population, Adam, doubling in size in the last 50 years, and the records suggest that to consume as we currently do, as, say, the USA, we would need 5 planet Earths to absorb our consumption habit, and within the UK that would be 2.6, 2.8 planet Earths within the next 10 years. So if we don't change, we're simply going to run out of stuff to make stuff. Having a reuse model, therefore, in our consumption behaviour is the right thing to do.
But Steve, when we think about small IT items, haven't they always been reused?
There is a big aftermarket for small IT, Adam. That is fair to say, but certainly in the domestic environment, there will be drawers full of old unwanted IT, and the next place for that generally would be the paper bin. At corporate level, of course, where there are thousands of, say, laptops being discarded every month, it's far more difficult, and you need a systemised way of keeping those assets in society, and Circular Computing fixes that.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Well, we can't scope out the future, of course, unless we know where we've come from. So let's take a brief pause and look at the history of computing development over the last 30 years.
Computers have been around since the 1940s. But for the sake of this video, let us jump ahead to a more recent time period of the 1990s. A period where the computer had become far more mainstream and technology became more crucial to the day-to-day running of a business. Technology became much more user-friendly, and as such, it was no longer just the realm of skilled computer proficient users. It was not long before every desk had a computer on it, and all of a sudden, large corporations had thousands of units within their buildings. At a similar time, the first really useful version of the laptop meant that employees were not bound to a desk and were able to take their work with them. During this period, the tech was doubling in speed and halving in price, and the numbers in circulation grew from 170 million in 1995 to approaching 500 million by the year 2000. As technology advanced, so did design. Every few years the changes were dramatic, and they brought functional forward steps of tangible value to the user. Companies routinely swapped out their older tech every 3 years in an ever more necessary cycle of upgrade to ensure maximum efficiency. At this time, the vast majority of computers were in the traditional developed economies of the world, with USA and Europe being the largest. When this stock was exchanged for the latest models, it became the industry standard for the majority of the outgoing IT to be exported to emerging markets less able to buy brand new tech at scale. So the vast mature business of computer export developed. Millions of computers, laptops and monitors flowed from the US, Europe, Australia and Japan into those nations that wanted to buy them. They were distributed by importers to vast networks of resellers, and sometimes whole shopping malls were entirely full of pre-used computers gained from companies thousands of miles away. As time progressed, computers became more and more an integral piece of human life, at work and at home. Now is the period of maximum production. According to Gartner, it took 27 years to reach 1 billion computers and only 7 more years to reach the 2nd billion. Tech companies became tech giants. Screens became flat, and once that happened, they grew to 17, 20, 24 inches as standard. Laptops became lightweight with much better batteries and performance, and desktop computers became smaller and faster by the year. As time progressed, the dramatic changes of the past became more and more difficult to develop. The increased speed gained over one generation became less remarkable. It was not that they were not faster, slimmer, or nicer designed. It was that it became harder to make such a distinction from one product to another, which was separated by only a few years. To add to this, when Windows 7 was launched in 2009, it sold over 630 million copies within 3 years and became the stable bedrock of the IT industry for over 9 years before relinquishing its crown to Windows 10 in 2018. Because Windows 7 was the software of choice for so long, it brought along a period of stability for the computers it was used on. There was no need to change hardware because of a software upgrade, and as the cosmetic changes to products started to slow, computers, laptops and monitors became far more viable to be reused in the countries of first use, so exporting dramatically declined. It was at this point when refurbished products began to emerge as a reuse option. The majority of personal tech products are used for mundane tasks such as email, Word and Excel, and as such, a 3 or 4 year old piece of tech is very capable. Sellers of refurbished capitalized on this by offering a varying degree of quality products with warranty and support, and the option of reuse began to grow with the more flexible buyer. Some great companies with great work and skill serviced a growing demand within the IT channel for quality refurbished. The reuse of those same items now stays in the same or similar countries from which it came, and the opportunity for legitimate, professional, scalable and sustainable reuse had arrived. This is how we saw the market. The second user channel is upselling by using the word refurbished and selling up and into the wider business of IT buyers. The problem is that the word refurbished is depicted by its lowest denominator, and as the word refurbished is not standardized, the higher achievers have a big barrier to overcome. This is the brand new channel, the market that reuse wants to break into, but it sells certainty. It does not sell variable, it does not sell risk. But this is the gap in the market. This is the opportunity, and this was the catalyst for the idea, to position a brand here legitimately based around one very high standard of quality. No variable, no risk, at a scale that would interest businesses and organizations. To extend from this area and deliver the first real alternative to new to the wider channel. Between the dates we have been discussing here, 1990 and 2020, over 6 billion computers have been produced, and only 2 billion are in use today. 4 billion have been put in the ground or sent somewhere else or sold for a limited term of reuse. As an industry, we have to be smarter about this. This is the very definition of unsustainable. The opportunity to provide what people wanted whilst reducing the huge amount of unnecessary waste was the idea behind circular computing. This is why we developed the Circular Remanufacturing Process.
So Rod, I guess it's a good barometer of how old you are as to how much of that equipment you sort of remember.
Yeah, sadly for me, probably a little bit too much. Yeah, I mean, those beginning days, then, you know, tech was advancing so quickly. But yeah, those are the days when it took 2 people to lift a monitor, or Toshiba owning the laptop industry, or it took 13 floppy disks to load a copy of Windows. And even the fact that I've just mentioned the word floppy disk has probably lost 90% of our audience. But in those days, it was very much that business in those developing countries, there was so much volume that it was normal for companies like mine at that stage to be loading up containers of, you know, good product, tested, working. But you would have contacts in Morocco and Egypt and, you know, Uruguay, and you would load that product up. You'd have a customer there, and that customer would just wire you $200,000, and you would load that container up, and that stock would be shipped out. And that's generally how that market used to work at that particular point.
Yeah, it's interesting to look back at the retrospective of where this industry has come. And the ITAD industry, or IT asset disposition industry, has really done an amazing job about you know, making sure that the products have a data-safe second life. The question is, what happens next, and how do we do that better? Everything that happened next was a situation of conditions and compromise. Now we have zero compromise with our product, so we stand on a platform equal to or better than new, exactly the same as the main OEMs or original equipment manufacturers in terms of representation, quality, supply chain, channel. Everything is exactly the same. The industry has lived on a 3-year replacement cycle. So what we're doing is saying, we're no more going to do it this way to the industry. We're part of the catalyst that says, let's reduce the front end, the deployment cost, and let's reduce the back end, the data recovery cost. And to the depreciation cycle, instead of running the depreciation cycle on 36 months, let's then give the asset a couple of lives afterwards, which then allow us to say, divide the asset cost, the depreciation, by 84 months or 120 months. And that changes the economic dynamics behind the ownership and the use case, the cost of use for IT. That is what we're really delivering here.
It's interesting that back in the day when there was an aggressive refresh strategy that kit would go off to the developing countries, they started to mature. They started to draw off more new equipment. It's no longer good enough to move this asset away to a place where it no longer has visibility. So having a system that enables them to have a duty of care to the assets that they no longer need is a sensible one, yeah.
So Rod, what do you see as the main difference between refurbishment and remanufacturing?
I think they both have really important roles to play, but I feel that refurbished is a quick route to capitalizing on a product. I think remanufacturing is how to deliver a product back into the supply chain, but at a level that it's more aligned with how the customer acts around new. For us, doing remanufacturing properly means building a completely dedicated building. From there, it was hundreds of mini research and development projects to work out how to get a like-new product at every step. And to a degree, this process is half repeated when we take on a new model. Whether it was working out how to test and replace components, respray the laptop, install a new screen, or source and replace simple things like rubber feet, an extremely varied and huge task. But for us, all of this work became in the end the circular remanufacturing process, which is a 360-step process we use that takes on average between 5 and 8 hours per laptop. What this enabled us to do was produce thousands of laptops at a time to the exact same standards, no grades, all just like new. I think one of the challenges is that big businesses and organizations, they were probably right to not embrace refurbish in a meaningful way, because for them, it was about the variety and a variance in the performance and quality. But now, they're probably wrong if they don't seriously consider remanufactured.
Steve, thank you very much. And if I could ask you temporarily to make way for Martin Townsend, who we're now going to welcome to the studio. Thanks very much. Well, Martin's role is Global Head of Sustainability and the Circular Economy at the British Standards Institute, or the BSI. Martin, thanks for joining us. Can you just tell me a bit more about your role, and indeed the BSI's role in connection with business?
Yeah, so I look at my role, I suppose, as head gardener, about nurturing relationships with companies, helping them improve, making sense of a changing landscape. There's a lot of change expected for companies nowadays, and it's about making sure that we support them, we nurture them. Standards provide a very important ecosystem in terms of which companies are working these days. As we see business changing, we need to make sure, particularly on an international stage, that the right standards are used in the right way. And part of the process of change is transparency, making sure companies can be proud of what they're achieving, demonstrating best practice by using standards in the right way.
So what are the trends you're seeing emerge that are really driving change here?
There's quite a few trends here which I think are shaping this agenda. We're seeing a much more international agenda. We're making sure that as we think about driving change, that there are standards out there that are consistent across the globe. So we've gone through eras where people have made claims. We're now in an era where people need to have that confidence that brands that say they're doing something are actually really at the forefront, and actually people have the confidence in that process through standards, through assurance, and through that brand identity, where people are seeing that actually buying new is not always the best solution. Actually buying products that have been well refurbished and remanufactured is important to achieve those goals of sustainability.
So part of the reason for the timing of this event is that there is a very significant announcement to be made about how to move the industry towards a more sustainable future. So Martin, can you tell me what that announcement is?
Circular Computing are the first organisation to receive the Kitemark for remanufacturing, and the products that come from the process are equal or better than new. So I think this is a great moment for the industry. It's great leadership from Circular Computing in terms of demonstrating what can be done. And I think on the back of this, others will be following. But it's a great leadership position from you guys at Circular Computing. So I'm really pleased to hand this over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
So if I'm a buyer or a potential buyer, where has the ground shifted from this point forward?
I think I can summarise it in one word: trust. If I'm a buyer, if I'm in the procurement team, what I've now got is trust in a product to know that it's going to deliver what is expected of it, but actually do it in a way that has a lower impact. That's a powerful place in the marketplace in terms of sustainability and the procurement and the buyer's perspective. I've got something which I know will do the job, but is having a lower impact on the environment. And I think that's great as far as circular computing is concerned. It's great in terms of leadership in driving change.
So Scott, could you explain a little bit more about the difference this makes to a buyer who wants to make a little bit of more of sustainable choice about their tech?
This brings a complete distinction in terms of authenticity. What we've done, there's always been new and there's always been refurb. Refurb has a series of conditions and conditionality around it. We've built a product which has no conditions. It's zero compromise. So that's allowed us, that quality has allowed us to open up a secondary equipment manufacturer space. This is a space between new and a space between refurb where only remanufacturing exists. And the Kitemark assures our customers that remanufactured products are just what it says on the tin. Absolutely equal to or better than new, not only the product, but also in the warranty post-production.
And how do you see this as an important moment for the tech industry?
Well, first and foremost, being first to achieve such a thing is a really proud moment for us in our team. So internally, we think that's really important. But what we're really doing here is setting the standard. This is the standard now that the rest of industry will try to follow us. And with a Kitemark, that means that if we have followers, they're at least on our standard. They're at least offering the same good quality to our customers, to the marketplace. So I think here, as of today, we've anchored firmly the distinction between new and refurb. There's a gap in the middle, and we're filling that gap. We're just first. There'll be others. And this is the start of something really big and really important.
So Rod, as the founder, first of all, many congratulations on the award. But I've got to ask, I mean, what made you embark on this journey?
There's a part of any company that's pushing the boundaries, that the challenge is there, and you're going to, in naivety, you're just going to keep going. I think that as time progressed, it became very apparent that end users, consumers, companies, they're very much wanting to be more sustainable. But if you're asking a customer to compromise, then you're always up against more flexible companies willing to compromise and companies that won't. And obviously, as a business owner, it was obviously an opportunity and a challenge for me to deliver to the market something that's not asking the customer to compromise at all.
Martin, when we look at how sustainability has changed or is changing, do you think it is the consumer or is it businesses which are driving that change?
I think the consumer is really a change agent for businesses now. What does that brand really mean to that consumer? And it's also about making sure that that brand is delivering what they say they're going to deliver.
Well, thank you very much. Well, the subject certainly provides a lot of food for thought. So let's talk more about the role of sustainability in the IT sector. Well, earlier I was joined by Dr. Mike Short, the DIT's Chief Scientific Advisor. Why do you think we should concern ourselves at all with a sustainable approach to IT?
We only have one planet and our resources are very precious. It's very important to, therefore, recycle wherever we can. It's also very important to widen the choice in IT available to all.
Considering your 40-odd years of experience or so, do you get the sense that we're now witnessing an attitude change around the subject of climate change and social and environmental issues?
It's very clear there's far more interest in environmental and social issues than ever before. And it's very pleasing to see more and more solutions that will help us make for a cleaner and greener planet.
I mean, there are clearly direct benefits of having a more sustainable IT system, but because tech is so much a part of every facet of our lives today, do you think that as an industry, tech now has a bigger responsibility than ever to deliver change?
I think tech's always had a responsibility, but it's not always been so prominent as it is today. That responsibility comes through in both individual initiatives and sector initiatives, and I'm very pleased to see more of those coming to the fore.
Well, in making change, do you think it's legislation or policy frameworks being a driver for that change, or do you see that change coming from a business or indeed a personal consumer choice?
I think we all have responsibility for the planet, and as such, it's very good to see business contribute towards that. I think some areas of policy can lead the way, but also industry initiatives and innovation can lead the way. So I think it's good to see a strong blend of policy and innovation and business leadership in this area.
I mean, in November, the UK hosts this enormous event, COP26 in Glasgow. Apart from the spotlight, do you think it will actually bring meaningful change?
Yes, I'm attending COP26 in Glasgow in November, and I'm expecting it to be a real lighthouse event along the journey to better climate change and climate adaptation and mitigation.
The standard that circular computing has achieved falls under this wider British standard 8887, and many British standards I know go on to be adopted as ISO standards. What do you think is the importance of an organisation like BSI in providing a platform for business to differentiate the standards they work to?
BSI have many decades of creating fabulous standards. The reality is that today internationalization of standards is a much broader subject. I think this initiative between BSI and circular computing is very healthy because it shows a landmark approach to how to address this in practical terms. I don't think regulation has to lead the way. I often think standards and certification are a very good way.
Do you see the legitimate professional reuse of products being a good answer to making a more sustainable IT sector?
I think choice is good, and I think sustainable reuse should be part of that choice. I think some customers will buy based on green and environmental factors, but they'll also buy based on, having a good ethical approach to this upgrade and sustainability.
Do you think companies like circular computing are where sustainable change is going to come from, or do you think change will come from elsewhere, from the tech giants, for instance?
Change comes from everywhere. The tech giants will continue to have a role, but it's nice to have more choice. And I think this offers more choice. I think it shows leadership from an environmental point of view, but it also shows it's addressing new customer needs.
In delivering the world's first Kitemark certified remanufactured laptop, do you feel circular computing has provided a pivotal moment for the industry?
I think the initiative is really to be applauded. It's a good signal to many people and many customers. I think also it's a good indicator of the importance of the standard on which the Kitemark sits. It's clearly a good indicator to the customer of added value.
Well, outside of business and government, we know that many in the world of academia spend years studying where we're at. I spoke to Professor Mark Jolly from Cranfield University. One of your areas of expertise is sustainable manufacturing. So where does remanufacturing fit into this idea, this overall idea of sustainable manufacturing?
Well, Adam, remanufacturing is a key part of sustainable manufacturing, and indeed the move towards a more circular economy in general, in the use of our materials and our technical products. So we can achieve the UK government and indeed the world's targets for things like net zero. To do that, we have to start to dematerialise. We won't achieve the target of net zero by just cutting CO2 from our manufacturing and our transport. We have to use less stuff. Remanufacturing is key and a really, really strong method of extending the useful life of our products and thus the materials in our products so that we don't actually have to use as much stuff.
I wonder how the science even works to calculate what is sustainable manufacturing.
As you say, there is no one factor that can really be used to measure sustainable manufacturing. We have to follow the mantra of sort of make the same with less. So that the direction of resource efficiency is key. We must use fewer materials, less energy, less water. And if we aim to use less of all these things, it's a good first step. And we can measure that. We can measure whether we've used less of all these things in our end products. But commercially, we have a challenge. Challenge because current economic models all focus on reducing cost and targeting reducing prices. This has meant that as a society, we don't really value the materials and all the stuff we have. And therefore, we're less likely to be careful when we get to the end of life or the perceived end of the useful life of those products.
So what has changed in the last 10 years or so in the drive to deliver more sustainable outcomes in production that you have seen?
Well, I've seen a lot more companies becoming aware of things like waste, water usage and energy. Zero waste to landfill, for example, is a very, very strong driver at the moment. And, we've seen the impact that somebody like David Attenborough has had by saying, we've got to get rid of waste. But I think that is actually largely in manufacturing driven by legislation, which has raised the cost. So it's high on most manufacturing companies' targets, because if you reduce the waste to landfill, you don't have to pay as much out. But there are still far too many companies who believe that recycling in-house scrap or waste is actually a good thing to do. They think because they've kept it in-house, it hasn't gone to landfill, they're still going to recycle it. It's better than sending it to landfill, I agree, but actually they should be focusing on reducing in-house recycling and really making sure that they use their raw materials coming in much more effectively in the first place.
And when you look forward to a vision of, 2030 or 2040 and beyond, what does that vision of sustainable manufacturing look like to you if we get it right?
In a blue sky situation, I hope we will have moved forward, not just as a manufacturing sector, but as a society. We have to value the materials we have in our products. By 2050, we have to have cut our use of materials, and that's by 50%.
That's if we get it right. What's your vision? What happens if we get it wrong?
Did you see the wildfires in Canada? Did you see the wildfires in Greece and Italy? I mean, wasn't that horrendous? That the record temperatures being produced, almost 50 degrees in places there you would never have expected. That the floods in Germany, the inundation in the New York subway, and even in London Underground, at the moment happen less frequently, but in the worst case scenario, these will become a normality, and the Earth's population eventually will be squeezed in much, much smaller space. The area of habitable Earth will become smaller. And, who knows? We might have wars over water.
The news is filled with, headlines around the climate emergency. We bandy that word around a lot now. Do you feel as if it is being treated by the world as a proper emergency?
No, I really don't. I don't think it's being treated seriously by a lot of politicians as an emergency. Maybe after COP26 there could be a change. I don't know, but I really am quite pessimistic. Why are fossil fuel companies still getting tax benefits? Why are fossil fuel companies still being allowed to challenge governments who stop their building of new oil exploration plants? Even in Europe, this is happening, and I think this is dreadful. We've somehow got to change this economy based on fossil fuels, and people will believe that the politicians recognise as a crisis. I think the public's changed more than the politicians have in answer to that.
Of course, we have this global massive event, COP26, coming up, when the world's powers come together and at least talk the right talk if they don't walk the right walk. But do you believe that event, for instance, could bring meaningful change?
Well, if they focus on the right things, Adam, they have to be focused on action afterwards. But I do feel that COP26 to a certain extent focuses too much on energy and hasn't really tackled the challenge of materials and the relationship between energy and materials. We have to get this message across of dematerialisation. And if we don't do that, then it will never be a success. We won't hit those targets.
So what, in your view, is the importance of companies like Circular Computing delivering a sort of pre-used product as new to market? What kind of difference does that make?
Well, as a major supermarket chain says, every little helps, and it really does. And I would say that Circular Computing are doing a bit more than every little. I think they're doing a fantastic job. It's both our individual and our corporate responsibility to do what we can, and we have to encourage the development of other companies like Circular Computing in other sectors.
Professor Mark Jolly, Director of Manufacturing at Cranfield University. Fascinating discussion. Thank you very much. We hear a lot about consumer demand driving a path, but do those within the IT industry need to take more responsibility? Well, Soren Enholm, CEO of TCO Certified, the world's leading sustainability certification company, certainly thinks so. What do you feel is the role of certifications to help deliver a wholesale change in the IT sector?
Certifications are market-driven tools which purchasers can use to drive vendors and industries in a more sustainable direction. An even stronger driver is legislation, but legislation is usually slow, and also it needs direction. So certifications can both be a quicker way to drive change and also point out the direction for legislation.
And do you hear and indeed feel reuse of products is gaining momentum and now gaining true legitimacy?
Yes, I would say so. In the Nordic region, which is, I would say, in the front of sustainable developments, reuse of IT product has become a natural choice for many organizations, and I'm certain that we will see the same development in the rest of the world going forward.
I mean, do you think that resource preservation and the fight against electronic waste from that aspect is actually being heard clearly enough?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the public debate is still very much focused on direct environmental impact. If we look at greenhouse gases, for instance, it's very much focused on these direct scope 1 and scope 2 emissions that you generate yourself as a company or organization directly. But in many cases, the biggest impact are actually from indirect emissions, the scope 3 emissions, which are generated somewhere else at manufacturing, for instance. And if we look at a notebook, today it usually generates more greenhouse gases during manufacturing than during the whole use time. So the most important from a climate perspective is really to prolong the life length of the notebook. So and also many of the metal used in IT products are limited, so we can't just let them disappear as waste. So we definitely need more focus on this issue in the public debate, I would say.
And when you consider the electronic waste, Earth's resources, and look at the tech industry as a whole, and does the industry, in your view, have a magnified responsibility to be more sustainable than it is?
Yes, I definitely think this is the responsibility of the IT companies. In most cases today, pollutions and other sustainability violations don't cost the companies anything, and we need to change that. And as long as legislation doesn't address this, I think we need to put purchasing power on it.
I'm really interested in getting a sense of how important a moment you think we're living through. So in receiving the world's first Kitemark certification for remanufacturing of laptops, do you feel circular computing has provided this sort of pivotal moment for the industry right now?
I really hope that this Kitemark certification will help change this. We already see pre-used products in parallel with new products in some reseller channels. So I really hope the certification will convince more buyers to choose this option. So perhaps a remanufactured product which is sold as new with a certified process behind may become a quality label per se, which gives comfort for the buyers to choose this option.
Soren, a really insightful conversation. Thank you very much for your time. Scott, back to your company's journey. Now, you recently welcomed some very important guests to your UAE facility.
Yes, it was our pleasure to host Simon Penny, who's Her Majesty's Consul General for Dubai, and also Sheikh Mohammed from Ras Al Khaimah, who came to to help us celebrate, to mark this occasion. Part of it was the BSI, or British Standards Institute 8887. The other part, which is also really important, is we've just taken on another factory. We've just opening another factory 400 meters down the road. And why that's important is because this is a vote of confidence in the future. This is where we see this business moving forward. We have ample capacity to grow within our current premise, and yet we've still taken on additional facility.
Now, one of the biggest customer bases for the IT channel is the public sector, with Gartner reporting that worldwide government spending on IT will reach $483 billion in 2021. That's up 5% since 2020. So what is the view of the public sector and government about sustainable IT? Well, I spoke to Penny Mordaunt, Paymaster General from the Cabinet Office and Member of Parliament. Where do you sit on the challenge of making public sector decisions around sustainability? Because surely this is going to be an issue not just of importance here, but in lots of developed economies around the world.
Well, it's critical, and it's not just about materials or services. It's also about public finances as well, because inevitably there isn't enough money in the Treasury coffers to do everything that we want to do and know that we need to achieve. We have to find other ways of doing that. And there's so much innovation around, whether it's in business models or whether it's in new technology or how you approach providing particular products and services. And we've got to really maximize that and make use of it.
Well, Circular Computing is a company which has clearly achieved something of a world first in sustainable IT solutions. And I'm right in saying you've been a champion of that sort of approach to businesses, certainly in your constituency.
Well, it's very exciting as an MP when you have a business like that on your patch. And yes, it's a world first. And I think the opportunities with a company like that are immense. It's not just about the services they can provide. It's about creating an entirely new industry. It's about how they make everyone else pull their socks up too. They're obviously really now gaining traction with the public sector, but in the UK, but also elsewhere too.
Do you think the global pandemic we are going through, which has shown how quickly problems arrive at people's front doors, sometimes quite literally, do you think that's changed people's perceptions and reaction to the climate crisis?
I think it's brought to our attention the impact that activity has had on the environment and on nature. But I think also it's taught us that when we put our minds to it, we can innovate very, very quickly. Things that would take an age or would be much too complicated or take too long, we've done in a heartbeat because we've had to continue delivering particular services. And I think that is it's a lesson there for us that if we have a clear vision, if we've got some really clear ambitions, we should be able to achieve them, but only if we ensure that all the sectors are working together around that clear vision, and it is supported by government.
You're author of a book called Britain After the Storm, in which, amongst many other things, you talk about seeking to galvanise support from around the world and across political divides. Do you feel there is some sort of similarities or connections between the subject of the book and the challenge we face in the wider world with global warming?
I think there is, because we know that governments around the world can't do this by themselves. And if they don't have a clear vision, they don't articulate what that means, and they don't spell out how companies like Circular Computing can engage and really help drive those improvements and drive that change. I think we're about 150 years off delivering the Sustainable Development Goals when we should be less than 10 years. So something's got to change here. We've got to have a more dynamic approach. Of
course, in November, the UK hosts COP26 in Glasgow. Do you think global events like that will give the climate crisis and the issues and solutions around sustainability more impetus?
I think it will. I think that is often underestimated, how important that is, because people will be very focused on the negotiations between nations, how Alok Sharma has galvanized and negotiated with nations about their own commitments. But it's also a catalyst for trailblazer organizations like Circular Computing to be able to inspire, but also work with other businesses and other countries to really take up these, no-brainer, in my view, solutions.
You clearly see this as an important topic, but I'm trying to think in practical terms. What sort of steps do you think are needed to be taken in order to drive meaningful and timely change?
Well, I think that targets are always helpful, but perhaps more importantly is some clarity around what we ought to think business should be doing or other organizations should be doing at this time. So quite often people are thinking about social action or some kind of volunteering effort for their workforce. They're thinking about things they can do in their local community. Quite often they're not thinking about the kind of day-to-day stuff that their business does, that if they change the way they do it slightly could have a massive impact.
So we've heard Penny's views, but our public sector is a multi-departmental, huge animal that is notoriously hard to change. So earlier I spoke to Chris Howes, the CIO at DEFRA, and David Shields, the Transformation Director at NHS Shared Business Services, to get their views on where we are. I suppose, David, if I could start with you, talking about this challenge of creating sustainable IT, particularly in the public sector. How big of a task is that for you and your colleagues?
It's a huge task across all parts of the public sector, including the NHS. It's really more around the pace of change that needs to accelerate, and that's the challenge. I think there is definitely cost benefits. There's a desire, both I think on private and public sector organisations and suppliers, to change, but doing that in sequence at the pace that's needed, I think is the huge challenge that we all face.
I mean, already you raised a really important, crucial issue here, one of cost. But you see it as a cost to you to turn green, or do you see it as an opportunity? Are they opposing forces, or do you perhaps see that then coming together, that actually a greener environment might be a cheaper one?
The true cost of a burger is not a pound to the environment. So I think our whole approach to what is financially sustainable and the impact that has on the environment and the cost to the public purse needs to be considered more holistically across government. And that is, I think, for all organisations, actually, that private and public, that is a massive mindset shift.
Well, that's a brilliant introduction to Chris, who's not quite in charge of the environment, but that's certainly your bag, isn't it? But in the end, you've got limited budgets and you've got to keep within those. So in a very practical way, I wonder, Chris, first of all, do you see those more environmental choices as more expensive and something you try and edge in, or perhaps do you see them as an opportunity perhaps to reduce costs?
So very much from an opportunity perspective. Usually there are big cost savings as well there. So if you like, the sustainability benefits, whether that's in terms of a circular economy and reducing waste to landfill, or whether that's reducing our carbon footprints and meeting net zero, usually there's a very strong cost benefit to those as well. I would be lying if I said it was easy to build the investment case and to always get the funding that you needed, and or wanted to deliver more. But usually there's very much a hand-in-hand, twin benefit of being able to protect the environment and increase our sustainability kind of contribution, if you like, and reducing our costs.
Yes, I mean, there's clearly a challenge. I think, given actually where we are in terms of the COVID pandemic, we clearly know what a response to a crisis looks like now. Listening to you, both of you, I feel we could have had this conversation 3 or 4 years ago and it would have been much the same. And I don't see the crisis response from the IT industry that we've seen from COVID. First of all, do you think my point is fair or not? Chris, first of all.
So I agree actually with the points that you've made there, Adam, that I think we've demonstrated that when a crisis kind of hits the consciousness both of the public and of government, that we can react and change quickly. And I think the frustration for many of us, I guess, both in the industry and I guess from a policy point of view, is that kind of what more evidence do we need about the threat and the emergency in terms of climate?
On a personal basis, I think we have to have legislation, policy and targets that are moved far more quickly than we are and more rigorously, because the levers that most governments, and it's not a UK issue, this is just a general view across the world, if you need to move something really quickly, you have to legislate and you have to have rigor, and there has to be incentives and disincentives for organisations and individuals.
I think there are a number of areas that the government should lead on, and one of those areas I think is in transparency. Legislation on its own isn't sufficient unless you've got the transparency of the in terms of reporting from the supply chain, or in terms of particular products. We're not where we need to be, and we continue to work with major suppliers to get that transparency of their impact. I think it is inevitable at some stage that some things which are kind of personal choice, if you like, or organisational choice, that choice will have to be restricted at some stage. I think the issue that we keep coming back to is that that's okay, but is it fast enough? Does that truly reflect the nature of the crisis that we're in?
You've talked about the challenges that the industry, that the world faces. How optimistic are you that we will rise to those challenges in speedily enough?
I'm optimistic in the sense of, I think the recognition, we talked about COVID, the recognition of a major global catastrophe, and how that's galvanized activity paves the way. I'm optimistic that we are making progress and raising awareness. I'm optimistic that there's a path forward. I'm probably slightly more pessimistic whether we're going to actually get there.
And briefly, Chris, optimistic, pessimistic? What's your view?
Yeah, I think I'm optimistic that we will get to a point in sufficient time that we recognise the severity of the issue and the need to act. But I guess that's tempered by, the difference between this and the response to the pandemic is that there isn't a vaccine for this.
A final question to you both. I mean, we've talked around a lot of subjects here, and both of you have highlighted the complexity of that. So if there was one message, one thought you wanted people to walk away with from today's discussion, I wonder what might that thought be? David, if we begin with you.
I think with the theme of your questions is, as individuals take action, because we can all very clearly have a positive impact on our immediate surroundings and behaviours. So my message will be, everyone has a voice, use the voice and try and influence direct change.
We are on the whole a resilient species and recognise a threat when we see it. We just need to see it now.
So we've heard what circular computing is doing and the science and importance of certification. We've also heard about public procurement's input, and we've heard from a Member of Parliament. But what about the channel? the beating heart of the supply chain that has only ever had to supply brand new product before. Surely if distributors and resellers are not on board, it will make it extremely difficult to get product into the hands of consumers. How can the channel cope with demand that historically has not really been there before? Well, earlier I spoke to Ingram Micro, one of the largest IT distributors in the world, with over $50 billion of annual revenue. And this is what they had to say. Well, I have Mike Farrer, who's Senior Commercial Director of Ingram Micro in the UK, John Mayer, VP of Channel Financing, and Ivana Shepherd, Head of Sustainability at Ingram. And thank you all for joining us. I'd like, if I could, start with you, Ivana. First of all, do you see a demand, indeed an interest, coming down the lines of communications for what are more sustainable options in IT?
Absolutely. So we're seeing multiple trends developing in the IT channel. Number one, a lot more companies are committing to sustainability goals, and they're making these very bold commitments. I mean, just over the past few years, we have seen an uptick in companies making long-term commitments, and this has been reflected in passing down these responsibilities down the supply chains. Number two, we are seeing a lot more pushback and a lot more interest from the investors and from financial companies that are paying attention to issues beyond just profit, and they're paying attention to non-financial commitments. And then number three, we have, with the risen awareness of global environmental issues, so Gen Z have expressed, and they think that social and environmental performance of a company is extremely important when they're making the decision whether to purchase a product or a service of that company, and they're gaining much more purchasing power. And just like any other sector, the IT sector is facing challenges in terms of decarbonization, but IT can also be a great tool in helping other sectors achieve emissions reduction and greater sustainability.
Mike, if I could turn to you as the guy really at the coalface and the one that must take a commercial view of all of this, what are you hearing from your resellers about sustainability?
I think most resellers realise they need a strategy or a policy around sustainability, but I think they're very much at differing points in the journey. Most, I would say, are leaning on vendors and distributor partners for guidance and support. And I think the key questions that they're asking themselves internally are, how do we emphasise sustainability in our own business?
Do you think that sustainability is really starting to have an impact on the end users' buying decisions?
Yes, I would say increasingly so. But obviously, that's going to speed up, I would say, over the next 2 to 3 years, as the urgency for sustainability to be at the forefront of technology increases. I think in a lot of cases there's a disconnect from the sustainability policy of an organisation and the IT decision makers within that organisation. So I guess, again, this is where us as a distribution partner and our vendors need to assist our reseller partners with the tools and training to be able to help end users form a technology sustainability policy as part of their overall sustainability pledge.
I mean, John, you've clearly got experience from the ITAD perspective when old equipment is removed from the end user after use. How do you see progressive steps like manufacturing changing the landscape of what happens to used products?
It's a great question, and it's an exciting time because, I'm going to be real clear. This is a disruptive time in the industry. I mean, this remanufacturing is a disruptive type of thing, and it's a good disruption. And ultimately, it will actually create a situation in the traditional ITAD environment where they are perplexed, because you've now instituted something from the vendor on one side, the remarketing, refurbed on the other side, and now you have this remarketed, quasi-new. So I think traditional ITAD is going to have to be, revamped from how they've looked at this business in the past.
Ivana, if I could come back to you, How much of a role do you think government legislation needs to play in all of this, or is this always going to be just an individual business, an individual person's choice?
That is a fantastic question, and there's this conundrum, happening. Is it the government's responsibility? Can they drive this change? And certainly, they definitely should be behind this, because otherwise, companies would not necessarily make the commitments that they are required to. And so it's more about collaboration. And I know that there is a lack of collaboration between, governments and companies. So the more of this collaboration that we see, and the more we see governments really pushing for this and actually checking on the companies whether they're doing a good job and acting on, giving them maybe some feedback and some repercussions that come with non-acting or enacting in terms of sustainability commitments. But I truly see it as kind of a triage of governments, companies, and also individuals playing their role.
I mean, clearly the globe, the world is going through a very traumatic period. The global pandemic has shown people how those world events can come right to your own doorstep. Do you think that experience will change how people view, indeed, how they react to the climate crisis?
I think the pandemic has definitely opened the eyes of a lot of people. It is a different type of a crisis, compared to the climate crisis, because you don't necessarily see the impacts of climate change in your day-to-day life, although there are a lot of regions around the world that have been experiencing rising ocean levels and fires. And especially in the past few weeks, I mean, we have seen an unprecedented amount of natural disasters happening around the world. So I certainly think that the more the world's sustainability is not just a buzzword, but it becomes an actionable word. I feel like there can be a lot of disruption happening on both sides, coming from customers, as they certainly do drive behavioral changes on the side of companies as well.
Mike, circular computing bringing a certified as new remanufactured product to market with Ingram with no variable cosmetic grades. How significant do you think that is to the reseller's acceptance of a pre-used product over, let's say, a refurbished alternative?
There is definitely a valued space or place in the device landscape for refurbished product, but the words as new in relation to remanufactured obviously give a significant degree of comfort over a refurbished product where this cannot be guaranteed. So it allows for peace of mind around consistency of product quality, both in performance and aesthetics.
I would characterize what Circular has done for remanufacturing as they have actually accomplished the impossible. No one ever thought you could actually do such a solution like this. Being able to go out with something that's remanufactured new with a reduction in cost that is new, and then being able to do multiple life streams of a product line is really what we call the utopia in the industry.
Mike, I know you've been selling circular computing remanufactured laptops for, quite a few months now. So I wonder what insight you have, how it's going, and what the feedback has been from customers.
Momentum is absolutely starting to build around the brand and the proposition, and I think the key learnings for us have been how to educate our partners on the difference between remanufactured and refurbished products. Some partners have had less than satisfactory experiences with refurbished products, so they take a little more convincing, but once that hurdle has been passed and that they understand the circular computing proposition, they can start to build that into their solutions to their end users.
So what advice would you give to any reseller who is considering selling circular computing laptops?
It's quite simple, really. Give us at Ingram Micro a call, give the guys at Circular Computing a call, and let's get involved, because as soon as you see the product and understand the quality behind the remanufacturing process, you will be seriously impressed by the product. And you add to that the sustainability credentials of the circular computing product and proposition, as well as the cost benefits, and it's a highly compelling solution for end users to deploy. And to top it off, I would say the team at Circular Computing are passionate about their products, and I would say are amongst the most proactive of the channel teams that we've engaged with over the last 5-10 years.
I think the advice ultimately comes down to any reseller that they need to get into this space. This is one of those ones where the train has left the station. And so, I think you're going to see resellers that will be, I don't know how I ever live without this. I can't get enough of it. I'm going to really change my whole value proposition to go after it in the marketplace. You're going to have others that will institute it as part of their value proposition, and it'll be, I'm diversified, and so I'm dealing with a whole variety of different types. And then you're going to have the resellers that are going to be the anti. No, I don't think it's going to change. I'm going to stick to traditionally, what I've always done. I think those types of resellers are going to find themselves quickly behind the sustainability curve.
Fascinating discussion, all of you. Thank you very much indeed. Well, some glowing words there. Scott, why do you think it's therefore important to get sustainable IT into the distribution and reseller channels?
So I think there's two parts to that question. There's the channel and why is that important, and there's sustainability and why is that important. So I'd like to address the first one, is the channel. The channel is where business buys their IT. The vast majority of the IT spend goes through the channel. So we have to be relevant. We have to make the channel understand, comfortable who we are. We have to de-risk our value proposition in the channel. In terms of sustainability, it's a slightly separate question. Why do I think it's important to bring a sustainable solution to the environment? We've been hearing and seeing and looking, of course, at the world's requirements for reducing humanity's impact. And I think the United Nations has given us a really powerful argument or guidance with the Sustainable Development Goals, or so-called SDGs. And at the heart of the SDGs is resource preservation. Resource preservation is such a critical piece. As we heard from Steve and others, it'll be multiple worlds of resources that have to exist if we keep going at this pace.
So Scott, what would you say has been the reaction of that segment of the industry?
I think it's really important that organizations with the size and integrity and stature and importance of Ingram Micro, that they would come to us and even allow us to distribute our products through their channel. They've spent years building up the trust that's in that channel with their resellers, and finally with the resellers' end user customers in business.
Regardless of what is being offered, it's those that actually buy computers that are faced with the real-world dilemma and pressure of being more sustainable. So what's that like? Not the theoretical list provided by some sustainability manager, but the actual experience of swapping brand new tech for pre-used or remanufactured products. Well, to find out, I spoke to the CIO of Balfour Beatty, John Ozanne. John, your company chose to buy nearly 6,000 Circular Computing remanufactured HP laptops. I'm just wondering, have you ever bought or have you ever considered buying a used product before?
I think the short answer is no, certainly not in this scale. It is the way forward, though. I think how we buy and how we use IT is a fundamental part of our sustainability strategy. Being the first time that we did it, we did have concerns, and Circular Computing have worked through all of those concerns with us. And I think those concerns are probably quite predictable. How many units would be available for us? Would there be relative performance issues? What would the costs be versus new? But I found it a very seamless experience to work with Circular Computing, who had helped us all the way along this journey.
And when you were considering this, when you were deliberating about the options and how to proceed, how much of that deliberation and consideration was towards cost?
I think the key point is sustainability shouldn't cost more, but we know that there's been experiences where it has. So I think it would be wrong to say cost isn't a factor or a criteria when you're assessing these possibilities, but it's not the number one. Fundamentally, as the CIO of Balfour Beatty, I want to make sure the equipment operationally performs. and we needed to satisfy that criteria. Of course, costs comes into it. I would actually say in this strategy, we've got better value for money. I think that we've got a higher specification machine buying remanufactured than we would necessarily if we'd bought new.
Was there any pushback from any other parts of the business, from colleagues in the business, when a pre-used product was floated as an idea of something that was about to arrive on their desk?
No, but I think one of the things that strikes you is when these devices arrive, they're indistinguishable from new. So I think if we hadn't necessarily had celebrated as much internally our relationship with circular computing and discussed the benefits of doing this, I'm not sure whether our staff would necessarily have known they were using a remanufactured machine or not.
You're a little bit down the path now, aren't you? Your staff have had the product in their hands for, over a year or so. I'm wondering what you feel about how users feel about using this sustainable laptop product. What's the feedback regarding their experience? And indeed, even bigger than that, the sentiment towards the company they work for choosing a sustainable option.
Just before we started this conversation, Adam, I actually went and asked a few people outside in the office today to get some feedback. There was a couple of users that weren't aware they were using remanufactured laptops, but the overriding feedback is actually they feel the devices are better than what they had before. We know they're a higher spec, and that was a sales point for us. They are lighter. And actually, once they knew about the sustainability benefits that were coming from this, I think people are generally really supportive. So the feedback's great 14 months down the line. And we're not seeing any volume of operational issues that would force me to think, have we made the right decision here?
Having had the experience you have, when it comes time to refresh again, will remanufactured be the primary choice you consider?
Without question. When you look at the experience that we've had, it's a no-brainer. Lower cost, lower waste, better for the environment, and no operational performance concerns. We would absolutely do it again, and we'd highly recommend it.
A bigger issue here, how much value do you think will be placed on a company's sustainability performance in the future?
I think it's massive now. If you think about investors in our business, and there's lots of data available now, investors are making decisions much more based on ethical and social value. So it's key for them, and it's key for us. But equally, if you look at our customers, and 80% of our customers are public sector, and they're putting much more emphasis and weighting in the bid processes for projects to sustainability, social value. Somewhere between 10 and 30% of their weighting of projects is going down this direction now. So it's not just about the future, it's right now that a significant amount of value is being put on this sustainability agenda.
So what advice would you give to any other CIO in your position who was looking to buy certified remanufactured laptop products, perhaps for the first time?
I think there's a couple of things here. I don't think you necessarily set out to buy remanufactured laptops. What you set out to do is provide really good, robust, high-performing end-user computing devices at the right price. And our assessment led us to the point of remanufactured devices. And if a CIO like me finds themselves in the same position, I would say get to know the partner well, work with them on any concerns you have around availability, around performance, around costs. Do your homework and make sure that the supplier is who they say they are and they work in the way they say they're going to work and they've got all the right certifications. And I'm sure if you do that, you're going to find a similar experience to what I have, which has been wholly positive.
Well, in this industry, there are certainly some companies which are more influential than others, and Google obviously fits into that category. Well, I grabbed some time with Matt Britton, who is Google's President for Business and Operations in EMEA, and he's got a keen interest in sustainability. I suppose if I could start by asking what is essentially rather a broad question, why should we concern ourselves at all with a sustainable approach to IT?
Half the planet's online and the other half's coming, so it's central to what we do. And of course we want to make sure that every time we use technology, we're not adding to the climate crisis. And that's why I'm really proud at Google. I joined in 2007 and we became carbon neutral then. And we've gone further to say, actually, we want to be carbon free by 2030.
Do you see technology occupying sort of important place in the drive to become more sustainable, tech is now so much an integral part of everything we do. Do you think it has a bigger responsibility to deliver on its potential here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of pieces there. One, you want your technology itself to have zero impact. And it's really important to look for those people who are not yet well connected by technology. And we saw this in education in the lockdown. Schools, about a third of the PC stock in schools is sitting in cupboards unused. So taking old kit that could have gone into landfill and turning it into modern, secure, fast machines is one of the ways we can both increase access but also make part of our approach to the circular economy work better.
I'm interested in where you see sort of the impetus for change coming from. And by that I mean, do you see global or perhaps national legislation being the key driver for change? Or do you see it more of a business or indeed a personal option here, a personal choice?
I think one of the things we've seen in the pandemic is that communities, companies and government had to work together. And I think that is absolutely the recipe for tackling the climate crisis. So we need regulation and we need to see COP26 being really successful. Companies need to do a lot more themselves, as I talked about what we're doing at Google, in order to decarbonize their supply chains and help their customers make better choices. But communities too, whether it's recycling efforts or coming together to look at what you can do with ride sharing or whatever else. So I think you need all three of those things to work together. And I'm actually somewhat optimistic as we see generation change happening, as we see people getting more and more concerned about the very visible impacts of climate change, that we'll see an acceleration of progress. All eyes are on Glasgow later in this year to see whether governments can come together and make a step change. I mean, it really is urgent, and let's hope that they feel that pressure on their backs.
I mean, clearly Google is a leader in big tech with benchmarks to set, not just for Google, but for the whole industry, really. So given that, how is Google approaching the idea of a more sustainable IT sector? And indeed, do you feel a sort of responsibility to lead here?
One of the things that has kept me at Google for 15 years is the fact that we really have tried to be a pioneer on climate. We want to become zero carbon. That means powered entirely by renewables 24/7. Now, we don't actually know how to do that, but I think that's one of the things companies can do, is set a bold target and figure out how to make progress towards it by pioneering, but then by sharing with the industry what we're doing, showing people that it's possible, sharing some of the technology that does that, we can really help the whole industry transform. And I think that's one of the things we want to do. None of us know how to do this perfectly, but by working together, we can make more progress.
So how important do you feel it is for the industry as a whole for circular computing to have brought a sort of legitimacy to laptop reuse in the shape of this as new certification? I mean, do you think that is sending the right message to the channel?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that the circular computing initiative here to certify for reuse is really important, because people worry about technology. Is this machine going to work? How does it all work? It seems like magic sometimes, and having certification so you can trust that the machine will work well for you is really, really important.
Do you feel that certification was actually going to negate some of the risks or perceived risks associated with laptop reuse by the channel and indeed by the end user?
The remanufacturing standard that's being launched is really helpful in people being able to trust that a recycled machine is something that they can use safely. And I think that level of confidence will help us to get connectivity and digital access to many, many more people. I'm really struck in the pandemic how stark the statistics are about children who weren't able to connect to schools.
In November, of course, the UK hosts COP26 in Glasgow. Do you believe that global events like those will give the climate crisis, sustainability, indeed the circular economy, significantly more impetus than it has in the past?
Yeah, look, we're at a really pivotal moment in time, aren't we? For climate and the climate crisis, and all eyes are on COP26. But I think, I'm encouraged by our experience through the pandemic that governments and companies and communities coming together can make for real progress. We've seen that response. We need the same urgency of response to the climate crisis. And the other thing that's encouraging is that we know that the technology we need to attack the climate crisis is already here. And the circular economy and computing plays a part in that. clean technology and renewables. People can see in things like wildfires and flooding and some of the natural phenomena we're seeing, they can see now that this is here today. And I think that has encouraged everyone to think again. The other thing that's happened is the pandemic has broken all of our habits. All of our consumption and travel and other habits have been broken for 18 months or more. And I think, you know, if viewers are starting to get back into normal life patterns again, we're all conscious that we're making new habits. And some of those habits can be deliberately better or different habits, maybe about exercising, maybe about the way you travel, how often you need to go into offices if you're an office worker. So we've got this unique moment in time when we can apply some of the things we've learned from this terrible pandemic to the climate crisis and really look at how we can treat it with more urgency, but also join up across the world through governments, through companies and communities to tackle the crisis.
So, Steve, I suppose we can judge for ourselves the technical and cosmetic experience here, but what do these sorts of numbers do for a company like Balfour Beatty and indeed for the wider sustainability picture?
The important part for Balfour Beatty and its stakeholders was that its biggest customer, the UK government, is now insisting that its suppliers have a decarbonisation plan. So what circular computing present up as part of the impacts that we make, for every laptop that we sell, we will plant 5 trees. They bought 5,000 machines over a course of 5 months over the course of COVID. That resulted in 25,000 trees being planted, which will result in plus minus 6 million kilos or 6,000 tons of CO2 being sequestered. They can report on that. Additionally, if they were to consider only a new solution versus a remanufactured, the delta is 316 kilos on new versus remanufactured. So they saved an additional 1.58 million kilos in adopting a remanufactured solution that they can report on their scope 3. There's no e-waste. And what we did there was they had 5,000 machines coming out of their organisation. Of course, the ones that we supplied were changing in. And those machines were then put back into our circular ecosystem for remanufacturing, and they found a new home in something that was sponsored by the DWP here in the UK, which was great for the government.
So, Rod, what do you see as the future for circular computing?
I think growth, more of the same. The company has now moved into a segment where there is no limit to where this can go. And I think that as we go on this journey and we build, and you know, there's more questions to answer, and I think the next challenges are exciting as we go forward.
And Scott, any final words to add?
Well, Adam, I think you know the perception is probably the biggest competition or biggest obstacle, to the extent that our products, our quality, our solutions, and ultimately those of our competitors that join in the fight at the level where we are in the remanufacturing world, where there's zero compromise. I think those we've seen that industry accepts us, that distribution accepts us. So as we scale, as we grow through that, I think the impact to humanity, to the planet, to our children's planet and our grandchildren's planet, I think the impact is really important for all of us and really exciting.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. Well, as we've heard, the path towards a more sustainable IT future has many steps, which in turn will lead to big changes. Now, a lot of people and companies believe that circular computing has made a significant step today, and we're going to hear some of those comments in a moment. My name is Adam Shaw, and thanks for joining us for Sustainable IT, the Future Reimagined.
Hey, Steve Wozniak here from Little Fruit Company. I love it. The world's first certification of laptop remanufacture. Whoa, to get that certification must have been a lot of hard work. Thank you so much. You know, we all have the ability to visualize the incredible waste in totally trashing the huge quantity of laptops every year in landfills, and, you know, when parts of them could be reused. You know, who's going to put out the energy? Well, you have to find efficient ways to do it. but it's honorable. So are the efforts of circular computing to look at all types of waste, including the carbon footprint, and to contribute to reforestation projects and that really shows where you're thinking, where your end goals are, and you're getting to it by this method. It is true genius and hard work that really leads to finding, good products, a good balance between specs and cost and waste. Keep up the good work. Inspire other companies to follow your examples. This is from a real fan, Steve Wozniak.
Circular computing has brought us one of those many steps that has all the sustainability of reuse and none of the risks so commonly associated with a used product.
It's a real honour to be here supporting circular computing and this new standard. We're really looking forward to seeing what the circular computing initiative can achieve in making the technology sector cleaner and greener and more responsible. So thank you so much again to Circular Computing for hosting us, for inspiring us, and for all that you're doing. Looking forward virtually to toasting you and your achievements. Thank you.
Congratulations to you, Circular Computing, for achieving such a demanding certification and inspiring people around you. This is a great milestone in our quest for a circular economy. We can lead the way for decarbonize a digital world. Congratulations again.
Congratulations on the BSI Kitemark certification, a step that validates the quality of the product you deliver and highlights the difference that true remanufacturing can bring above refurbished.
Achieving the world's first certification of laptop remanufacture is an amazing achievement for circular computing. I've already got one of the laptops here, so I can certainly vouch for the quality personally. I hope this inspires many other companies to focus on reducing emissions too.
To the entire Circular Computing team, I just wanted to extend a huge congratulations on the significant milestone accomplishment with the recent BSI Kitemark certification. It's clearly a major testament to the groundbreaking, visionary, and truly inspiring pioneering efforts of the full Circular Computing organization.
I want to congratulate Circular Computing with becoming the first company in the world that is certified for remanufactured laptops with the BSI Kitemark. We believe that the remanufactured device market is here to stay, and the circular economy will grow massively in the coming years. So again, congratulations to the Circular Computing team, and thanks to the Circular Computing team.
Extending the IT lifecycle with legitimacy, professionalism, purpose and scale, this British standard certification is a truly brilliant step towards delivering to our customers what they're increasingly asking for. Sustainable IT, but without the compromise.